Tucked into the remote wilds of southeast Alaska, Lituya Bay is the very picture of absurd peace. Its waters, a glacial blue and smooth as glass, perfectly mirror the steep, forested cliffs and snow-capped peaks that cradle it. The profound silence is typically only broken by the cry of a bald eagle or the sight of the occasional grizzly bear on the shore. It is a lovely, postcard-perfect scene, but beneath that serene exterior lies a mechanism of terrifying power built like a loaded gun. The bay itself is not truly a bay, but a fjord. It is long, narrow, and carved impossibly deep by retreating glaciers, with sides that plummet almost vertically into the water. Its entrance is a tight squeeze, barely wide enough for two boats to pass, while its rear opens into what looks like a natural amphitheater of stone and snow. This stunning geography is also lethal. Running directly through it is the Fairweather Fault, an offshoot of the infamous San Andreas system, where the Pacific and North American plates meet, grind, and occasionally unleash their fury. Earthquakes here are not rare, they are expected. When the ground shifts, the beautifully dramatic cliffs, holding millions of tons of rock and ice, transform from majestic towers into precarious ledges, waiting for a final push. The combination of steep slopes, incredibly deep water over 2,000 feet in places, and constant seismic activity makes Lituya Bay uniquely terrifying, a natural trap patiently waiting. On the evening of July 9th, 1958, the air was still and the sky was bright. It was just another quiet evening in the Alaskan wilderness. Anchored in the bay were three small fishing vessels, seeking what should have been a peaceful, sheltered inlet. Aboard the Badger was a married couple. The smallest of the three, the Sunmore, held its crew. And on the third boat, the Eddery, a fisherman named Howard Orick, was settling in with his 7-year-old son, Sonny, hoping for a quiet night after a day of fishing. They had no idea they were positioned at the epicenter of an event that would defy belief, at the foot of a wave taller than a skyscraper. Just before 10:15 p.m., the unthinkable began to happen. It started with a rumble deep in the earth, a quick jolt that shook the trees and cracked the profound silence. A magnitude 7.8 earthquake struck along the Fairweather Fault. The force was powerful enough to rattle cities hundreds of miles away, let alone the unstable, narrow fjord. On the northeast wall of the bay, a section of mountain, fractured and weakened from years of pressure, finally gave way. This was not a slide, it was not a crumble, it dropped. A mountain section bigger than most office buildings broke free. 90 million tons of rock, trees, and ice, a mass roughly equivalent to 100. Golden Gate bridges plummeted more than 3,000 feet into the water below, traveling at about 100 miles per hour. The force of this impact, like a meteor strike, was almost unimaginable. It displaced a chunk of water the size of a small town. What rose from that impact was not just a wave. It was a vertical wall of water, a mega-tsunami so colossal it's difficult to believe it truly happened. The water, with nowhere else to go, was launched upwards and outwards. The initial surge shot directly across the inlet, climbing the opposite slope to a height that no one had thought possible, 524 meters, or 1,720 feet. It was taller than the Empire State Building, taller than the Shard. The wave ripped up entire forests, blasted soil from bedrock, and scraped the hillside clean as if swiped by a giant blade. Anything alive in that splash zone was gone before it even knew what hit it. Within moments, the bay was transformed into a blender of broken trees and seawater. The survivors later described the sound as the world itself splitting open. For the three small boats in the bay, it was the apocalypse. The Sunmore was the first to be lost. The smallest of the vessels, it vanished without a distress call, without a trace of wreckage, simply snapped up and devoured by the wall of water. On the Badger, the married couple was incredibly lucky. They saw the wave rise and somehow managed to scramble aboard a small skiff just before their larger boat was smashed to pieces. They were shaken, but they were alive. The most incredible story of survival belongs to Howard Orick and his son Sonny on the Ettery. Faced with a wave taller than a skyscraper, running was not an option. The water came too fast. All Howard could do was cut the anchor line, start the engine, and hope. In a moment that defies logic, it worked. The surge picked up their boat, flinging it like a toy through the bay. Orick later described the experience with the chilling clarity of a man who survived the unsurvivable. It was like being inside a washing machine that wanted to kill you. The boat was tossed over the churning chaos and dropped back into the water, battered but miraculously afloat. His son, Sonny, was unharmed, just a little shaken, a profound understatement for having ridden the tallest wave in recorded history. When scientists arrived at Lituya Bay after the event, they were borderline disbelieving. The evidence was stark and undeniable. The wall of water had climbed so far up the opposite slope that the vegetation line was completely erased. They measured the scarring on the hillside, the trim line, and it confirmed what the survivors already knew. This was, by a staggering margin, the biggest wave ever recorded. Normal tsunamis, like the devastating 2004 Indian Ocean event, usually peak at 10 to 30 meters, reaching a maximum of just over 40 meters at their worst. The Lituya Bay wave, at 524 meters, dwarfed them all spectacularly. Yet this mega-tsunami did not behave like a traditional one. It didn't race across the ocean for hours to strike distant shores. It rose and fell right there in the bay, a localized but far more violent event than anyone expected from a landslide. Miraculously, because Lituya Bay is so remote, the event did not become a global tragedy and did not kill thousands. The damage, considering the scale of the wave, was miraculously light. In Yakutat, the only real settlement near the epicenter, bridges twisted, docks splintered, and oil pipelines snapped like cheap string. A wave tower came crashing down, and underwater communication cables were neatly severed. If a wave of this magnitude had occurred anywhere near civilization, the death toll would have been monumental. It is easy to dismiss such events as freak occurrences buried in the past, but geologists are increasingly nervous. The ingredients for another Lituya Bay-style disaster are already lined up in several places around the world. The Cumbre Vieja volcano on La Palma in the Canary Islands has been identified as one such threat. Scientists have warned a future eruption could send a vast chunk of the island sliding into the Atlantic, potentially sending a wave towards the east coast of North America. Greenland is another sleeping giant. As its glaciers melt and retreat, they leave behind huge, unstable slopes of rock teetering above deep fjords. A relatively small landslide there in 2017 triggered a tsunami that destroyed a village and killed 4 people. The history of Lituya Bay itself shows that 1958 was not a fluke, but part of a terrifying pattern. In the last 170 years, the bay has seen 4 tsunamis topping 100 feet. In 1854, a wave reached around 395 feet. In 1899, about 200 feet. And in 1936, roughly 490 feet, all culminating in the 1958 monster. The fault line beneath it is still twitching. The unsettling truth is that this will almost certainly happen again. Climate change may even be making it more likely, as melting permafrost and retreating glaciers loosen the rock they once anchored. A similar, though smaller, event occurred in Fjord, Alaska in 2015, producing a wave that stripped trees 633 feet up a hillside. The only reason you didn't hear about it is because nobody was there. That is luck, not safety. One day, another wall of water will rise, perhaps not tomorrow, and perhaps not in Lituya Bay, but it will rise, and humans may not be so lucky. The 1958 event was a stark reminder of the planet's raw power one moment, A beautiful bay, the next, a vertical ocean coming straight for you.